Hello and most welcome to give us a sec. 1697 of the Heidegger series, and we will today focus on aspect seeing, aspect viewing. And in the book Wittgenstein, Rethinking the Inner, there's an example how aspects are of great importance in geometry. For understanding a proof may require the individual to see a diagram in a certain way. The point here is that understanding the diagram involves seeing it three-dimensional. That is, as though it were the object it represented. It takes a lot of aspect seeing to be able to do such a thing. Excuse me here. And I would say that must be stretched to all areas, and especially language, where the degree of aspect seeing makes it possible to do more, having a more advanced ability. It's not so hard to understand that aspect seeing is definitely applicable on language itself. Not only diagrams, think of language like a mosaic. all the different words, even in a sentence, can, because of the musicality of language, come together in different ways. So even understanding a text takes a certain level of aspect seeing. Reality itself, experience, perception, all those things also includes aspect seeing for it to be successful. Or the level of success is dependent in the skill of being able to see aspects. Meeting and interacting with people, listening to the voices, taking in gestures, postures, attitudes, and much more, must most definitely involve a high degree of aspect seeing. lack of a better word, the constellation of a person could be quite different depending on what sort of aspects you are able to perceive, or whatever you could call it. Perceive is not the right word, it's aspect seeing. I always thought about these things like a poker play, where you can have at least 2-3 aspects. The person is bluffing, or really has the cards. But I realize an actual situation is much more aspect laden. It's like all aspects. It's like looking into a kaleidoscope with a kaleidoscope. It's a never-ending alley in the end of kaleidoscopes, making for more and more understanding. In this understanding, aspect blindness becomes an impossibility, and the monosemic take makes much less sense what it could be. Where is it, so to speak? What part of the kaleidoscope? It is sort of a question that cannot even be answered. But this is at the same time helpful to getting more into the understanding of Wittgenstein. If you have a sort of fixation with the idea of a subject looking at the object, I think the full force of the clarification might be obstructed, at least. What hindered, at least, might even be completely obstructed. And this is definitely shedding a different light on the lack of innerness. What would be the innerness when two kaleidoscopes are looking at each other? We don't even know that there are two, to be honest. A lot of the understanding becomes easier this way. And I think it was a good choice of Paul Johnston to begin, of having aspect seeing in the first chapters. And here is an example of an aspect blind person. Could be looking at a vivid depiction of balloon floating in the air, and you would see the lightness of the balloon. And its direction upwards. An aspect blind would just see it as a balloon, a representation of balloon. The lightness of the balloon, its velocity, its aesthetic values, nothing of those things would be there. I think to this need to be added the kaleidoscopic view. And cannot really discern one aspect from another. To seeing it as a balloon is, was I would say, not more fundamental than seeing the lightness. So somewhere here the kaleidoscope takes it one step further. So in this case, the would be impossible to tell subject from object. Maybe, and this is a chance, maybe their proper uses are much more limited for the words subject and object somewhere in the language game. And a massive misuse have made subject object to fundamental. Sort of have become a sort of friction thing in the understanding itself, not really meaning that you believe that there is a subject and an object. It would be impossible to believe that, thanks to the private language argument. There's also the sense of aspect dawning, where there is a sort of temporal aspect. You slowly come to an understanding of what it is in comparison to the direct grasping of the duck rabbit. An impressionist painting could be that way. It slowly evolves, and erstwhile it doesn't change either. Once developed, it will stay the same. I have a similar experience with a painting. I bought it and it was hanging in the dinner room, and every morning I had my breakfast there. And in the beginning, the process of aspect dawning was hindered by a nasty mark in the painting. A blob of paint sloppily left by the painter, spot in the middle of the painting. But after some time I put my eyes somewhere else, away from the middle of the painting where it was situated, way too central in the painting to normally not be part of the gaze. And then I start seeing other things slowly evolving from the painting. And I started to see it was quite beautiful. Slowly it came. And once established, it could not turn back to where it started as a horrible painting. It had kaleidoscopically transformed. To strongly say that it's my perception of the painting that changed will be a misuse of the language game. The painting changed also. This is part and parcel of Wittgenstein's criticism of Wolfgang Köhler's Gestalt psychology. It would say that there were two different visual objects. More natural would be to say that the painting changed for good. There is another phrase used by Wittgenstein, and that is familiarity. In the famous example of the ambiguous figure of the double cross, the aspect seeing will either see a black cross or a white cross. Familiarity and knowledge about crosses are not really important here. But when it comes to the duck rabbit, if you're not familiar with a duck, or let's say any bird, you will be stranded with only one aspect, which is quite interesting. We can give different words to this. Let's try skill. In this complex, situational, kaleidoscopic world, there are loads more options than just the two in the ambigram. Gazillions, billions. So skill will make more fantastic figures, more delight, more choice, a sense of that you can choose whatever. A more wondrous Disney world-like world. There's some connections with skill that still bring about the subject-object disjunction. Maybe knowingness could be a much better suited term, not referring to sides, not limiting as much. It's more of an openness. Maybe that word is much more amenable to the kaleidoscopic view. This giving more possibilities, and also all of a sudden that could be an I, an ego to be more specific, and what that ego sees can be, so to speak, established within the kaleidoscopic view. It's a bit misleading. But the concepts, words of the Sprachspiel or language game grow, I feel, in force with letting this playful idea of a kaleidoscope come in. It becomes softer, less fixated. This is an expansion of dissolving the pre-made rules of language, the universal grammar of Chomsky and fanatics, or the classical laws of Newtonian physics, permanent, eternal, and non-changeable, and on top of all, before anything else. We need to take that stretch that even a bit further and see what happens. But there will be a return of someone seeing an I like the letter after H. In this more open understanding, that is a definite possibility. We get rid of the homunculus as well. This is expressed like this by Paul Johnston. Wittgenstein's discussion of aspect perception resolves the puzzle about the two types of seeing, for it shows that vision is by no means as straightforward as the inner picture account makes it out to be. What we see does not belong to one homogeneous category, but involves different types of concepts, each of which is an object of sight in a slightly different sense. In particular, the aspect of a picture belong to a different category from the colors and shapes which make up that picture. One could say this dissolves the homunculus problem, that is, the perceiver inside the head that is the receiver of the outsideness in form of light or what carries the depictive force of the outsideness to the inside of the head. In aspect seeing, almost directly inside and outside, stop making all that sense, or only be important to a very low degree. not affecting or reducing the scope of what is possible. Instead, there is a massive expansion, and space itself begin to be seen as also aspect seeing. Depending where you start, space becomes enlarged or narrower. This is a very far stretch from what currently goes on within science of perception. But my guess, this is where it's going. And this is also an understanding of perception that is very close to quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics show that our knowingness, our knowledge, is what decides what's out there. Knowledge cannot in any way be cut off from what it is knowledge about. They come into existence just like the duck rabbit at the very same time. It's also very helpful to see how Saul Kripke understand the idea of meaning blindness. And in Schulte's book, you can read that Kripke did not think Wittgenstein was a behaviorist. But he goes in the wrong path when he says that Wittgenstein's method of investigation is largely an introspective procedure. And I can understand to a certain degree, although it doesn't make any sense what we know when it comes to what we know, what Wittgenstein thought about that introspective way of learning something. We mentioned that before, all the problem with no corollary, no check, and no origin of language or aim. Enormously problematic. And the objectivized approach, which is most certainly what Kripke is proposing, you can get a sense for it. It doesn't really make sense in the language game, the objectivized approach or take. It's a bit like universalizing certain expressions and not using the word object in its proper natural habitat, but instead forcefully pushing object into all sorts of places, almost like hitting a screw with a hammer to get it into a square hole. It simply doesn't go in. And this objectivized take is not objectivized at all, it's just something that doesn't fit. So it makes sort of a noise itself that could be then named objectivized. The misreadings of Wittgenstein, actually very helpful because you get, so to speak, the two sides of knowledge, both the not knowing of Kripke and the knowledge that is Wittgenstein. And that is often surprisingly effective. Also Köhler served his purpose, how you take away the problem with the object and then you get the visual object as a sort of ontic thing in itself. Well, we're closing in on the end here. I'll try to wrap it up a bit. This is also hurting my poor knees. But retake on the kaleidoscopic view is expand aspect seeing, see that it is a billion more ambiguous than the duck rabbit, and then you start understanding it's your familiarity with things. You need to know a rabbit to be able to have that different aspect. Going from one moment seeing the rabbit to the other seeing the duck needs familiarity. That familiarity could be renamed knowledge, and then it's not a far stretch to see that also that knowing is aspect laden, or so I call it like a mosaic or kaleidoscope. And all of a sudden it's not clear where it starts. Does it start? Well, you can't even tell what should be the object, what should be the subject. Here, effectively, there in the end is a conclusion, what you see or what is seen. You have you end up with only an object. I think it's helpful because all of a sudden these rather light hintings that seem until the kaleidoscope to be not as firmly established as the heavy objectivized worldview of Saul Kripke. But then you have this kaleidoscopic softening up of everything, and it's no longer that far-fetched, and all of a sudden all the different cogs moves and you changed gear completely. And that is in itself a direct jump from one aspect to another in knowing itself, if you like. All is made from this. Nothing is outside this plethora of aspects. They both build what is stable and what is passing. And at the end, it's knowingness itself that calls the shots. The decider, the understander, if you like, or the understanding as a thing itself. While dusk has fallen, and I thank you very much for participating in this go-through of Joachim Schulte's book and Paul Johnston, and the weight today was on aspect blindness, aspect seeing, and aspect dawning. I say thank you very much for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon or evening. Bye bye for now.